Packet pushers.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Packet Protector, the podcast at the intersection of networking and security, or I guess maybe today, the podcast at the intersection of psychology and cybersecurity. Today, we have a guest, somebody I've known for a very long time, Dr. Stacy Thayer. And if any of you have worked in the security field for a while, you've probably know about the Source conferences, and Stacy was actually the founder of those conferences. So she is a professor of psychology at Norfolk State University and a consultant doing work in team building and other things related to psychology, but also in event management for creating kind of psychology-based experiences for people. So a question popped up in my head after a series of weird things got mashed together that I'm going to tell you about in just a second. But it really got me thinking about, we talk about psychology in the context of security with end users a lot, like cybersecurity awareness training and
social engineering and stuff. Yeah. But we rarely talk about the psychology of security professionals.
yeah.
So that was sort of our objective for today.
Yeah, so we're looking at the psychology of the practitioners in IT and security operations and architecture, and kind of talking about, like, especially ADHD, which is how the conversation sort of started snowballing in my head. We talk about, some of the spectrum of autism and dealing with this as a person in the field and a manager in the field. We talk about burnout. There's several links in our show notes to other talks Stacy has done at Black Hat, so definitely check that out too. And yeah, Drew, let's dive in with Stacy. So, Stacy, the way we got into this conversation, and I messaged you, was I was teaching a class about prioritizing cybersecurity projects and resources and all that jazz. And we were talking about why people just don't tend to do the basic things consistently or well or at all. And then in a completely unrelated conversation, less than a couple days later, I was talking to my partner and another professional friend about something completely different. And he was saying, he's ADHD. And one of the things that he notices about himself and this other thing we were talking about is they don't like to go back and revisit things. Like, when something's done, it's done, and they just want to move on and they want to do the next shiny thing. And then I kind of thought that's interesting because I think a lot of us in the industry are diagnosed or self-identify as, ADHD or something that is, neurospicy or diverse in some way. So I'm just curious, like, the psychology of understanding what's going on in our brains. Like, what could we do better? What are tools we could use to not be so adverse to kind of going back and doing these basic things? Because we keep saying in cybersecurity over and over again, you're not doing the basics, you're not doing the basics, you're not doing the basics. And, if you look at 1,000 breaches, 999 and a half of them, something on the CIS, top 18 controls would have stopped it, right? What's your take on that?
So one of the things that our brains do, whether we're neurodivergent, neurospicy, we close the gap, right? So we want closure. Okay. And so we've done something. Okay. We've done that training. We've done our passwords. Check, done, move on. This is, I think, especially important with people who have ADHD, because otherwise we forget things. We're like, oh, wait, where's that thing that's over there? And it's very hard to find the closure of it. So when we've moved on from something, not only are we moving on to the next new thing, like, okay, we're done. Let's put that aside. And then it almost can kind of become like out of sight, out of mind. I did that thing. Okay, it's done. In your head, it gets parked like a car in the little done garage. And then we're on to like new and interesting things. And I think what we have to remember is in cybersecurity, there's no such thing as done. Not in this industry. There's no such thing as done. It comes right back out of the box. It's just there. And so keeping in mind, whether it's scheduling those follow-ups, right? Of, okay, here, I built the foundation. Now let's revisit this in a month, in 2 months, 3 months, whatever your cadence is. And remembering in your mind that, okay, let's create a plan where we're never fully done. And yes, it's boring. Yes, it's not something that's going to be interesting. Why don't these people know how to have a good password, even though I've told them 3,000 times? And if I say it one more time, I'm going to bore myself to death, right? Like, it's that also combination of empathy as well too, that we eat, sleep, and breathe cybersecurity, right? Knowing, okay, I need to follow this protocol. For somebody who's not, say somebody else in a company who may be in a different department that doesn't even think about security until their security team pops up and says, hi, I'm here to make you think about it, they're forgetting everything. And so the tools and techniques that I always recommend is, okay, so one, get a process around revisiting everything, that nothing is ever done. It has to be trained, retrained, drilled in, and then trying to think of, okay, even though this is really boring for me, this is kind of new for somebody else. And in some ways, you kind of got to grin and bear it, but to try and, if you can, get creative. Okay, so maybe we think about doing it a different way. Yes, it's the same topic that I'm bored of. It's the same protocols. It's the same basic information, but is there a new and different way to make it interesting for us so we're not saying the same thing over and over again and it's boring and repetitive? trying to find ways to make it interesting. Because what would be interesting to you that you have to hear about over and over again in yourself, but other people may not? Because we all have things that other people, they live the life, and then all of a sudden it comes to us and we're like, oh, I never thought about it because I haven't thought about it in a year since I last saw you.
Yeah. No, I want to rewind real quick to your first thing, which was to kind of just acknowledge that nothing's ever done. Just like we say, break a large task into smaller tasks, is there opportunity for us to kind of mentally chunk those into different dones? Like this project that might be, something that's revisited several times in a year or two, instead of thinking of it as one project, does it help us to think of it as little projects that are their own little entities that we can mentally check off?
Yeah, I think when you break things down in bite-sized pieces and the person who's working with them understands both how do these bite-sized pieces go into themselves, but still keep in mind how they connect to the big picture. So it's that kind of forest from the trees piece. So yes, break it down because you won't be revisiting everything at the same time. So break it down to snackable pieces, but also when you do that, it can help make it more manageable. But it can also help you keep things updated. By doing things like that, you can avoid things like legacy software, right? Because maybe you're revisiting what new software you have to be like, wait, we don't really need this, as opposed to buying it, using it, sticking it on a shelf, and then forgetting it's somewhere in your infrastructure that nobody has looked at for years.
Oh, that never happens.
Never. Never heard of that a day in my life. So yeah, so break it down as much as you can and also break the time periods up. So it's not just once a year you're doing a security review. Chunk it up like month by month, day by day, whatever works for you and makes sense. But that way things aren't falling by the wayside.
I want to ask this before we go too far. Not everybody, but most of the people that I know around me, they self-identify themselves as ADHD. What does that mean? And what is the diagnosis for that? Like clinically, what does that mean?
Okay, so attention hyperactivity disorder
Okay.
or ADHD dysfunctional disorder. I mean, how you want to classify, there's different names for it, but there's ADD, which is just ability to pay attention, to focus. Then you throw in the hyperactivity, and that's where your brain is like bing, 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 bing. And you tend to, well, exactly like it says, be hyper, be excitable, need stimulation, babble. At least that's how it, can come out for me, right? And in some ways, it's like you want those dopamine rushes, right? Like you're craving them. Now, when you go through the diagnosis, and I've actually just gone through this because my daughter was just diagnosed with it, is what they're doing now is they're doing it at the school level for a lot of people. And now certainly for my generation, like when I was a kid, we weren't diagnosed in the way that it is now. And so a lot of us are self-diagnosed because either we didn't recognize it and know how to cope with it. I was told when I was a kid, they told my parents, like, don't give her anything to fidget with. Don't let her touch anything. No jewelry. I wasn't allowed to wear jewelry because I would jingle it. No click pens because I would click it. Teachers hated me.
Oh. So many people have been diagnosed in their adulthood.
Yeah.
Drew, I bet you probably know a few scores of those too.
I was just thinking in, my own Catholic school upbringing, we didn't have this kind of language at all. So you were either fidgety or a bad kid, even when maybe it wasn't you wanting to just disrupt. It was your actual brain chemistry being like, I can't sit still. This is not an ideal environment for me.
That's how we got paddles.
Yeah.
I think ADHD is how paddles were invented.
Yes. The ruler across the knuckles. Yes. Or the trip to the principal's office.
Yeah.
One thing I think, though, there's a lot of work in security for sure, and in IT in general. In fact, in any profession that is just boring, and you don't need to have a diagnosis of ADHD or anything to be like, oh God, I don't want to do this. So are there, even if you're not on any kind of spectrum, techniques or things that you could say to help folks? Because there's no way of getting around some tasks just have to be done, even if they are terribly boring.
Hang on, Drew. Hang on.
Yeah.
I want to finish hearing how they diagnose it now.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. Go ahead.
Sir.
So many good questions. Okay.
We're going to throw them all at you and then you can just babble for a while. There you go.
Okay.
All right, back to diagnosis. Yes, and then we'll circle around.
So now what I recommend people is you can reach out to mental health clinics and they will help diagnose you. There are tests that can be done. There are assessments, there's discussions. And I mean, a lot of it is on your own self-awareness. And this is something that I think whether people are medicated, not medicated, that's a choice that each individual can make. Same thing for their family. But regardless, for pretty much anything out there, there's always a behavioral component to it. So even though I could go into like the neuroscience and the brain and the behavior and everything, unless you're also treating the behaviors and you have that self-awareness, and I think Juice might go into also what you were talking about, but you have to know that, okay, this is how I work. This is what works for me.
Mhm.
And you can go and you can get that diagnosis, and they may say, okay, here's your diagnosis, and you have qualified. We've done the tests. We've given you the ratings. You score. It can vary between doctor and doctor, what scales they want to use and how they want to do it. And some are much more lenient, and like, here's your medication. And then others are just like, let's do some behavioral plan. But you do get to craft your own as an adult, which is nice. But still, at the end of the day, we are responsible for our own behaviors and our own choices. That won't change. And so we have to have that level of awareness to manage and to say, okay, I know myself. I know when I get bored, this is what can happen. This is especially prevalent in the security industry, because when we get bored or we drone out, that's especially when false positives, false negatives, not reading things correctly, things can slip through
Mhm.
the cracks. So a bored and glassy-eyed security practitioner is a really dangerous thing to have, right? Like, it's one of the reasons why I love what I do, because there's such a direct threat to the way that human beings work, but then also this does translate into the way that people perform their security work.
Yeah, I'm thinking like that's why log analysis is one of those things everybody is the best practice, but God, it can be so boring. Or, vulnerability management. New report comes out, here's 50 new vulnerabilities, but we still didn't get to the 30 from last week, et cetera. And it's just kind of boring. So, yeah, tips on how to deal with that, whether you're neurospicy or neuromild,
So some of it is, yeah, we just have to grit our teeth and bear it.
which is very much the Catholic school approach.
It is.
Because they'll make you feel guilty if you don't.
Well, now are we back to the paddle? Okay. Should we be handing those out at RSA?
Oh God. God.
The RSA ruler. I love it.
Yeah, right.
Because that's the thing. I mean, you can't walk up to your boss and be like, I can't do the log analysis because I got ADHD. It's not going to fly. So,
Well, I've had very honest conversations with my boss. So if you give me an Excel spreadsheet, I am not an Excel person. It is not my strength. I can do it, right? And I have done it. But, for example, when I've done event work and then I've been given a list of, 1,000 attendees that came by a booth, and I have to go through and scrub that list. Okay.
mm,
I can
mhm.
do it. I can absolutely do it. Is it going to be slower? Yep. Is it going to be deliberate? Yep. And I know this. And am I going to need, like, okay, I'm not going to get this done for you in an hour. Like, I know my limitations. And so I set the expectations of that. I'm going to
Mhm.
give you my best. I'm going to do my best. However, it doesn't flow in a way. Like, we all have things that seem effortless, we are incredibly talented at. And then we have things that just are a little bit harder. And it's okay that things are a little bit harder. I think it's about setting the expectation, because equally, then I've had people on my team that are like, oh my God, give me an Excel spreadsheet. I love Excel. I can't wait.
I have a friend like that.
Right? I marvel at those people that, like, could do something like that in an hour. And I just, like, had the conversation. I was like, well, if they're really good at it and that's their talent, but running a meeting, they don't want to speak publicly, and I feel comfortable doing that, maybe we could alter it out. It's something that speaks to the strengths and speaks to the things that we love. So the job is getting done. Now, that can't always be the case. We don't always have that luxury or that ability, but I think it is about setting the expectations of, yep, I'm going to get this done. I'm not saying no, but you have to create your strategy, because what you don't want to do is do it in a way that's not effective. So while I've never gone through a log analysis report, I can imagine if I was, what would happen is after about like 20 minutes, I would probably kind of get really tired. My eyes would then start to scan and skim.
Mhm.
And I'd have to catch myself and go, no, no, things can slip through the cracks. Go back, double check. I have to double check my work. I have to slow down. And so sometimes what that means for me is, okay, let me take a break. Let me go outside. Let me not look at a screen for a little while. Okay, refresh, come back. Now I have increased attention and focus to be able to spot those little details and things like that.
Or some of the engineers listening might go down a different rabbit hole, which is thinking, oh, I could write a script to look for this. And they'd start getting into regex and Python and then installing 3 things and upgrading their system and ordering more memory and, whatever else. And then 2 days later, forget what they were.
Why they wrote the script in the first place.
Yeah, they're lost in side quests, right? Yeah, and, how do you bring it back? But again, knowing, okay, I call them side quests. I forget where I
Mhm.
picked that up, but I loved it. And so the other day I went up to go, like, do something. I think it was my kids' laundry or something. I got caught in looking in a box of stuff, and before you know it, I'm an hour there, and I'm like, side quest, get back to it, right? Like, we have to catch ourselves. Comes back to that awareness of, this is what my goal is. This is what my job is right now to do. What do I have to do to get it done in a way that I can, deliver good quality work?
So it sounds like one takeaway I'm getting is for the individual employee, it's about self-awareness. It's understanding
Yes.
your strength. It's understanding where you struggle and devising strategies to help you in those times when you struggle.
Yeah.
Maybe it's taking a break. Maybe it's task switching. Maybe it's getting up from your desk to walk around for a minute, whatever works for you. But that level of self-awareness is going to be required. If I'm running a team or, running a whole organization, are there things I should be looking out for in terms of spotting the signals of where my workers or team members or whatever are most and least productive?
I always like to try and create an atmosphere where that can be an honest discussion. Now, with the caveat, please do not go and say, I think you're ADHD, or I
Right.
think you might be neurospicy. So, disclaimer
Yeah.
there, do not do that unless you really like HR and friendly conversations with
Yeah.
HR.
Well, we used to use like a grid of like, show me the things you're supposed to be doing or doing. There's a scale of I like this and a scale of I feel like I'm good at it, and letting them kind of plot things out because there's some things that they would, identify as I like this a lot, but I know I'm not good at it, very slow, but I want to be better and learn more.
Mhm.
Or you think I'm good at this, but I really hate doing it, that kind of
Yes,
thing.
that's a really great way of starting that conversation and starting that dialogue. I mean, one of the things that's interesting, right, is a Mac is used for one thing, a PC is used for another, Linux is used for another, right? And we speak to their strengths and their weaknesses. Some have more weaknesses than others, but some have different strengths. People are not necessarily unlike that, right? Like if you're giving somebody something that they're just not operationally really good at doing, it just creates frustration all around. And so if you can identify, okay, right, this is what they like doing. Because also, how many people out there are actually working the exact job that they applied for in the job description?
And other duties as needed.
Exactly. So much like you when you first bought that piece of software that now like you never use, all good intentions, but right, jobs and roles evolve. People step up and then all of a sudden it's like, wait, I was just trying to help. How did I become responsible for this? And so it evolves and it can evolve away from what you were originally trying to do. And so as a manager, not only do you know, okay, what do my people like to do? Where are they strong? Because this will make your team better. This isn't about going soft on people or people just say, well, if they don't like it, they can leave. Like a little part of me dies every time I hear a manager say that. But when you work with people and they have to compromise, it's not you get to just work on all the stuff that's fun for you. But when there's give and take and you can speak to your strengths and you have again, that psychological safety to be able to raise your hand and say, okay, I need a little bit of help here, but you know where they're really strong. And when you're using somebody or just like when you're using a system, the way the system is supposed to be used, it excels.
What did you mean by psychological safety?
So psychological safety is when a person feels like they can be themselves, they can bring their strengths up, they can bring their weaknesses up, and there's not going to be repercussions. If somebody is afraid to say, "Oh, okay, I can do this, I can look at this Excel document, but I'm worried that I won't be as good at it as you need me to be," that's not an end all be all. That's a conversation. And if you're afraid to do that because, oh my God, they're going to think I can't do the job, I'm going to get fired. Because a lot of us live with anxiety. ADHD has a 40% comorbidity with anxiety.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. And so never mind just people that just have anxiety on their own, right? So that can really get into your head if you don't feel comfortable raising your hand and saying, I have an idea for how this could be improved, or I have an idea for maybe we could tweak something here. And so if you don't feel comfortable and you feel like you're going to be judged, you feel like you're going to be fired, you feel like it's not safe, people essentially withdraw.
Mhm.
Whereas if you create that safe environment, like, okay, I can talk to my boss about this and we can problem solve it together because you are a team and you should be working on your employees as a team. A manager and an employee are also a team in that. And that's about creating a relationship, just like we do in our regular relationships, like even my friendships, right? Like it's dialogue. There's, oops, I didn't mean to do that. And you talk about it and you hopefully become even stronger because you learn. Any job is a learning and thing because it changes over time, it evolves, it grows. And if you're not having those conversations, question if you're growing. How is the company growing?
We won't go down this rabbit hole side quest, but I feel like there's a whole other conversation to be had around the number of people, especially in this industry, that were individual contributors that got put into, and you use the word manager, and I think that's very appropriate, that got put into air quoting, a manager role
Mhm.
and were never equipped to retool themselves for that role.
Yeah.
And they don't have the skills to create an environment that has psychological safety or really any other type of support besides maybe I can help do technical things because that's what I was doing before. So that could probably be like a whole other episode another day.
4 or 5 podcasts on that one. That's a big hot button for me
Yeah.
in talking about. But yes, 100%.
So are there some general sort of tips or easy wins to like start constructing an environment that provides psychological safety for people on the team?
one, as a manager, asking yourself, okay, what kind of relationship do I have with my employees? What kind of relationship do I want to have? Do I want to be somebody who's approachable? Do I want to be somebody who cares about their well-being? And the answer is sometimes no. I've met managers that do. They have that, like, this is just a job. We're not here to, worry about people. You show up, you do your job. If you don't like it, you go. And one of the days, like, okay, that's okay. That's who you are. But in the event that you have an employee that needs a little bit more than that, do you have another resource? Is there a resource at the organization, whether it's HR, whether it's somebody on your team? Sometimes somebody steps up in the team, and I kind of call them the heart and soul person, right? There's always that kind of, you hope, person on the team that gets the pulse of what everybody's going through and becomes that go-to person that you all talk to. And
That's your observability tool.
yeah, yes.
Yeah, human observability. Good one, Drew.
I love it. So, what are your beliefs? So, that's one of the things that a manager should ask themselves. Am I somebody that believes in the human factor or not? Because if you don't, that is a choice. And I'm keeping it polite because obviously I feel very differently about the work experience, but I respect that people know their comfort level too. But the fact is, people are human and they will have anxieties, they will have doubts, they will have fears. And I think when you lose people's humanity, you stop looking at them as a holistic person. You can't just isolate one part of somebody and expect that just to be the only thing that shows up. We have whole lives, we're whole people.
But can you create an environment of psychological safety without feeling like you have to be sort of like best friends with everybody on your team?
Yes. And I think that's looking at what kind of resource are you? And can you be somebody that someone can approach, not necessarily to be best friends? You don't have to go into their personal lives or know everything about them, but do you feel like you're working together? Or do you
Mhm.
feel like it is just a one-way relationship where you're giving them things to do and occasionally there's feedback? Like, do you feel that you have at least a good working relationship where you hear your employees? And that's kind of a bellwether too, is how often do you listen to what your employees are saying as feedback? And what do you
Mhm.
do with that feedback? Because that feedback, that's your employee trying to communicate to you. And if you're disregarding their feedback, they don't feel heard. You may not like what they have to say. You may disagree with it. You may say, no, we're not doing that. But is it done in a respectful, conversational way? A lot of times also explaining why. If someone comes to you with an idea of like, hey, can we change this? And you just say no, womp womp. Like, nobody likes being told no. But if it's like, I love the idea, the answer is no, because if we do, it's this, 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 and this, and it kind of becomes a learning moment.
Mhm.
It's not just shutting somebody down. No one likes to be shut down.
For those who are maybe feeling squishy about something like psychological safety, there's ways to be human without having to be like, I'm hugging everyone.
Oh God, yeah.
No, we don't have to all be huggers. There's no kumbaya, I promise. Like, it's just respect. Like, how do you want to be treated? And how would you just treat a human? AI is not that evolved yet. We can't just throw things at them and off you go, little robot. Like, they're humans.
So I have a question. I think most people would argue I'm like the opposite of ADHD, although I have some what I would consider serious like symptoms of side quest, the trail of half started things throughout the house on a Saturday. But I'm always have like this super anxious OCD feeling. I'm not like clinically OCD, but this kind of compulsive feeling about certain things that have to get done and get done a certain way. And it's a little bit weird. But for people like me that might be looking at other people going, you just need to suck it up, buttercup, and figure out some self-discipline. Where is the line between somebody who's, neurodiverse and maybe ADHD with figuring out what their strengths and weaknesses are versus, calling on, self-discipline and figuring out, whatever structure is going to work? Because there's stuff that all of us just don't like to do or we're not good at. That's not an ADHD thing. It's just a human thing. So how do you know when something is driven by that and it's just how you work and you need to learn to work within that structure versus you're not maybe ADHD, you just need more discipline in your life?
So keep saying that, but it does come back a little bit to self-awareness and knowing, right, there's all stuff we don't like to do. Now, for me, I know when there's something that I don't like to do versus this is actually compromising the integrity and the quality of the work. Okay. Like,
Mm.
okay, working 6 hours on a booth shift. Do I love it? No. Can I do it? Yup. Right. Like, it's fine. Right. I can do that. So for me, when I'm doing something where I'm like, wow, if you want me to be in an office, say from like 9 to 5, that is incredibly hard for me. And my work starts to deteriorate unless I can take a walk, unless I can talk to people, unless I can take breaks. Now, that may be the case for a lot of people. It's a long time sitting, for example, in a day. But it's at what point do you take a look and go, like, I'm actually not able to necessarily produce this. To me, it feels like a blocking when I'm trying to do something and I can't do it. Ultimately, everybody can do something. It may feel like you may need all these tips and tools and techniques, and it may be hard. Things can be hard and you have to endure that. But there's that, is it worth it ratio? So if you're in a job and you're in a position and it just is not coming naturally and you're pulling out every single tool and tip and technique and it's just making you miserable, are you in the right job? So then it becomes that, because we shouldn't be miserable all the time. We all have to suck it up sometimes. So what's the ratio? Is there still an ROI on your time, on your job enjoyment? How much of your job is it sucking it up and how much of it is not? And then I think if you think about it, like we mentioned, like, okay, so there may be some things you're OCD about. Could you just not be OCD about them?
I try really hard.
You try really hard, but you can't.
Yeah, the number of times I'm like, "Oh, I'll just leave this fork here, or I'll leave this thing there," and it's, like, sideways or something, and I'm like, "No, I'm gonna be normal. Yeah, I'm gonna walk over here and, like, sit down and drink my tea," and then, like, I put it down and I walk back into the other room, literally to straighten something on the counter that's not even in the room I'm in. It's definitely hard.
Yeah, but can you tell in that feeling, okay, this is something that's just like an itch. Like actually there's a really good Big Bang episode where Sheldon has to be like, Leonard has to wear a scratchy
Mm.
sweater. And what he's saying is that scratch, that itch of a scratchy sweater is what it's like when something is disruptive to me. And like, I love that analogy because like, right, it's just something about it that's like itching at your brain and can't stop. And on the reverse for, I can only speak to my personal experience, having not actually been in the body or brain of someone else yet.
Yet? Did you say yet
Yeah,
at the
wait,
end?
what?
You said yet at the end, didn't you?
Told you, we don't know where AI is going.
Do you know something we don't?
Just sent a weird shiver all the way up my back.
It got creepy. Anyway, no, because I, don't know what that experience is like. I can say that for me though, my brain feels different when I get that, like it's tired, it needs a break. I can feel it. And I need to be able to do something to then go back and be the best employee and the best producer that I want and need to be for myself.
Going back to, self-awareness and whether you're on a team or a team leader needing to communicate. I'm thinking of my own son who is studying cybersecurity, but is also diagnosed with various things. Having a conversation for him can be really hard and really anxiety producing. Are there other ways to communicate without conversation? Or I guess like if the idea is communication is essential, but communication is also difficult for you, how do you balance that?
So I've worked with managers. This person just said, just let me do my job and leave me alone. I don't want to talk. I don't do the relationship thing. So it's very, very real circumstances in which that can happen. And my response to that is usually like, how comfortable are you, the manager, with that? And are they producing? Is everything okay? And that's just what they need. I mean, the hope is that we can meet people where they're at, because again, that's psychological safety. Because if somebody's not comfortable talking and they don't want to stretch that,
Mhm.
they just really are, I just want a job and, this is my comfort zone and I'm excellent if I stay in my comfort zone, but I don't want to go, out for drinks with the team. I don't want to
Mhm.
go to these, team breaker activities, right? Like we still want to meet people where they're at. And again, as long as they're producing, they seem content and do those check-ins of like, hey, how's it going? And learn these subtleties, I guess, of what their communication style is. And if someone said to your son or somebody who doesn't like to communicate, okay, but can we establish a protocol for if you don't like something, you'll let me know?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just set expectations with somebody, right? Like, okay, check in. If you don't like something, this is what our rules will be, and create rules around that. Because sometimes that's really what people like too is, okay,
Mhm.
I know. And then I can trust if there's a problem, they'll just come to me and I'm not playing the guessing game. Because especially for people with anxiety or managers with anxiety, if you're doubting, are they okay? Do they like me? Did I do that right? I'm not confident in myself as a manager. What if my team thinks I'm terrible? Like when you start getting into your head like that, it can go downhill real fast.
I love that notion of structure because I think one of the things that's difficult for him with conversations is they're open-ended. So yeah, that's interesting.
I hate that about conversations. I'm like, I can talk to anybody about anything and then I'm done. Like, very much an introvert. Hashtag obviously not a psychologist, but kind of where my brain is going with this is like, we've kind of talked about ADHD a lot, but there's a lot of people in our industry who are autistic or, somewhere on a spectrum that seems like a very big spectrum of how they operate and what they feel like their limitations are in interacting with other people. You did a Black Hat talk
Mhm.
on that. So we'll put a link to
Yeah.
that in the show notes because I think that might be, you want to give everybody a little one-liner about what you guys hit on there?
Basically, that divergent thinking and that kind of structural thinking can be a superpower. And then as a manager, though, it's okay, how do you nurture and train and essentially protect that superpower? So if you're
Mhm.
somebody who maybe is very uncomfortable socially, but is an absolute genius with structural thinking and working with technology, but oh my gosh, I think the example we gave during the talk is if somebody comes and talks to you or chats you up while you're trying to focus, hell hath no fury, right? So how can you protect against that? And so it really spoke to meeting people where they're at and letting them be the superhero they can be, letting them nurture those amazing strengths and weaknesses that they have. But yeah, if somebody is, say, on the spectrum and talking to people, small talking, water cooler talk is an absolute nightmare for them. And then by proxy, the miscommunication with the people who are trying to communicate with them, find a way to let them be, whether that's working from home, giving them an isolated office space or corner. If it's an open layout office, can they get high desks? I worked in an office, it was all open layout, but the technology team just needed high cubicles so they could focus.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, you should want your people to be doing the best work that they can be. That's why you
Yeah.
hired them.
And I like what you said about, having protocols that if you're not a talky person, just setting an expectation, I think most people will find some comfortable way for them to communicate that, smoke signals, orange
Mhm.
sign on the door versus a purple one or, whatever. How much of this, if we're not doing a good job meeting people where they are, if we're not doing a good job creating environments that are psychologically safe for people, I'm going to use the B word, is this contributing to some of the burnout that we have in the industry?
Yes, I mean, the direct correlation of this, because if you are asked to work outside, what comes again, I love this concept of flow. And what flow is when it started with athletes, when the athlete is in the zone. And we as people can get in the zone with our work. Like, have you ever had that feeling where you're like, this is just coming out, it feels awesome, and like you love your work and you enjoy it. Now that can't happen all the time. We know that. But if it's never happening and you're just miserable and it's just hard and you don't feel like you're doing a good job, because you've also had those times where you're like, I am terrible at everything I touch, and that feels bad. And the more that we have that, yeah, the more burnt out, the more beaten down, the more depressed. And when that happens over and over, when we don't have those wins or we don't have those feel goods. And the fact is, I have talked with so many people that are like, I shouldn't have to feel good. Well, okay, I hear you. I hear you that you shouldn't have to, like, the reward systems, and we shouldn't have that. But yet, we are also psychologically, as human beings, our brains are wired to know what is good and know what is bad. If that gets cloudy and we don't understand it and we're not getting any kind of feedback and it's all just confusing, our brains are like, what is happening? And so it's just as much a brain piece as a behavioral piece. And I think that often gets overlooked because there's a lot of people that says, right, I don't like this human squishy stuff, right? You're here to do a job. You shouldn't be burnt out. And as a result, it's just becoming worse and worse and worse. And it compromises the structure of a security team. And that's really where people should care, because if you're getting insider threats, if you're getting false positives, you're not getting reviews done correctly, and you could spend millions of dollars on software and programs, but if the person who's managing them is too burnt out to notice them or use them effectively,
Mhm.
or just shuts down, then what's the point?
Okay, so thinking about burnout, is there a clinical or even just kind of like a working definition of what burnout means other than like, man, I am just tired?
So there's no clinical definition. It's not like a DSM diagnosis or anything like
Mm.
that, unfortunately. So there's different definitions of burnout. What I tend to use is when the ability to do your job and to do your work and to enjoy your life has been compromised for reasons that are not obvious. So it's not that somebody, a tragedy happened or something like
Mhm.
that, but effectively that weighed down feeling just is compromising your life satisfaction. And a lot of times what that can translate into is you're either cynical about your work, so nothing matters. This person is an absolute insert name and expletive here. You're angry and it's all consuming. Like it starts to hit a constant state. We all have peaks and valleys, right? We all have the good times, the bad times, but
Mhm.
all of a sudden it almost just becomes like a flat line of like just suckitude.
How entangled is, because I think we think about burnout in a work perspective,
Mhm.
or at least that's the context we professionally discuss it in. How entangled is that with somebody's personal life?
I think completely. I look at people holistically, and it it bleeds into your personal life because you're exhausted. absolutely exhausted. And when you've been at a day at work that just is draining the life out of you, and then you go home, and then what happens is like maybe your friends want to go out and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. Or your family wants to spend time with you and then you don't want to do that. Like you're not enjoying anything. Or again, it's like a battery draining. So I'm an introvert. And so I love people and I can talk to them, but I can feel my battery draining so that by the end of it, I'm like, okay, I gotta go. Right. And if I don't get that, I get pretty frantic at times. Right. And I've heard extroverts are the other way. Like if they're not around people for a while, they start to get freaked out. That is foreign concept to me, but I'm going to go with it. But imagining that battery draining, but it never charges back up. And you're just always running on that empty battery. And then when I have gone through burnout and like my kids are like, let's play. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to die. Like I can't. And I have to explain, like, I need alone time right now. Like mommy needs to recharge. But then there's the guilt.
Yeah.
And it piles on. And then what happens is you just shut down. And so I created a chart when I spoke at Black Hat about burnout. Essentially, what I did, I created a Maslow's hierarchy of needs for burnout. Because what happens is if you could ask, well, what can I do about burnout? And if you ask the internet, you're like, oh, go work out, go exercise, go meditate. And I'm like, no, I just want to get out of bed and stop eating Taco Bell for the ninth day. Okay. Like I am in my load. Right. And so it's about meeting you where you're at and, okay, what can I do to get the next step forward? Do I need help? What are the resources that are out there? Will therapy help? Like, are you at a place to even try to get help or to even recognize it? These are the questions that usually I start off asking when I'm working with someone at burnout. It's like, okay, where are you on this, kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of your emotional need for enjoyment of your life?
Are there ways that team leaders can spot signs of burnout and maybe try to minimize it?
Yeah, if you notice changes in their work, sometimes it can be they're coming in late, they're arguing with people, there's resentment building up, they're complaining about things, like every little thing. That can be often the cynic's way of coping with burnout. Then there's the ones that just withdraw. And they're just silent withdrawers of self-efficacy, which is your belief that you can do your job. And they just have lost all confidence. So you try to give them something and they don't want to take it. They pull back and they're not even showing enjoyment or pride in the work that they did. So have you seen any kind of difference? And so it's being able to look and see, okay, I haven't checked in with them for a while. And so check-ins are important. Those are one of the things when people look at when they're managing and they look at their weekly meetings and they need new time, a lot of time one-on-ones are the first to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a lot of them.
Yep.
And I have a love-hate relationship with them too. What I would often say to people that have worked for me is head above water. Yeah. Okay. If head goes underwater, you let me know so we can deal with it.
Uh-huh.
And even if we just had that amount of communication for that moment and then followed up later, but I would always try and make sure that were they feeling overwhelmed with everything? If there was a lot going on, and to ask them, like, how are you feeling about the work that you're doing? And to ask those questions. And if they're just shut off and there's just a wall, I mean, you can't make people talk if they don't want to.
And it's hard with people working remotely. I mean, I know, with the team I worked with for a long time, it felt very in tune with like everybody's demeanor in any given day because I could tell how they were moving, breathing, talking. You could almost just feel the frenetic energy and anxiety that they had if that was going on for them that day. But with people working remotely, it's like, I think that's a lot harder to tell. But putting that aside, if you do see those signs, what are some good tactics for getting things turned around for that person?
Coming back to that honest dialogue. And so first question yourself is, as a manager, are you comfortable asking some of the questions? Are you happy here? Do you like the work that you're doing? Even using that idea of, you mentioned like a chart of, okay, rate your level of satisfaction. I've given that to people. I've created just a quick survey of like, how are you feeling about your job right now? Compared, do you like it as much as you did a year ago, less, and an anonymous survey that you make yourself and put out there if you don't want to have the conversations, right? Giving people that output. And then to be able to take a look and ask is the hope is that as you're talking with your employees, you're asking like, what do you need? What do you need to be successful? What do you need? What can help? And if, their answer is, I hate my coworker, please fire them. Okay, well, that we can't do, but as a team, let's together come up with some ideas for ways around it. And again, it's not mollycoddling. Sometimes you just got to suck it up. We all have people that, we haven't enjoyed working with or that are difficult to work with. But again, you're a team trying to all come together and work it out, and with the hopeful intention that everybody wants the best for themselves, their job, and hopefully their team. And if that's not the case, then we get into, okay, and this could be a whole other podcast again of team dynamics, team morale, and how do you come together as a team to rally? hopefully there's also an outlet, whether that's like Slack or team meetings or something where someone's having fun. And I don't mean scripted, like let's go on an escape room online, though some people love those, a little bit for everybody. But I know team icebreakers are not everybody's favorite. But, still, I think most of the companies that I've worked at, there's been at least some channel or some way where people can have fun, whether that's a Slack channel devoted to video games or, something like that, where you can bring a little bit of your personality into it. Some of the companies that I didn't like working for didn't have that level of enjoyment,
Mhm.
and it was missing. It was definitely missing.
Well, Stacy, this was an interesting look inside the mind of the cybersecurity professional, and I think we could all do with a little more self-awareness. So thank you for your time. If folks are interested in reaching out to you and seeing what you're up to, where should they go?
The first off, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate it. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, LinkedIn is always a great place.
Awesome. Well, we'll have all those links in the show notes that accompany this podcast. Again, thank you, Stacy, for being with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thanks to the listener for joining us for another episode of Packet Protector. If you've got a topic you want us to cover, you can find us on LinkedIn, or you can reach out at packetpushers.net/community, where you can join our free Slack channel where there's other IT and security pros. And if you have a comment, a correction, or a question, you can reach out at packetpushers.net/FU. The FU is for follow-up, and we appreciate when listeners reach out. As always, stay safe out there.